I have a few things in common with Andreessen Horowitz, I think, in terms of intellectual positioning. I think one of them is that I like to cite Lenin. I don't know why. Is it because we are actually at the brink of destroying capitalism, or maybe it's just my age, or I really don't know. But I do come back to Lenin in both ways, in the positive way and in the negative way. One of the Lenin quotes is, "For a long time, nothing happens, and then everything happens in 1 week," or something along those lines. And that's exactly how disruption works, which I think is a positive thing, at least for us in our portfolio. And then there's the negative side, and this is what I want to talk about today, and that is if you want to corrupt capitalism, just kill the currency. Incompetent central bankers are the best friend of communists. I want to talk about this, and it is a big concern that I have because I think we're exactly in that situation right now globally, particularly in Europe. Japan's already past that, and I think the US is kind of sliding into that same, I would say, very, very dangerous fallacy. This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's September 6th, 2021. This is Crim Delco. Today is Monday. It's Labor Day. There's no update. We're up 15.3% for the year. The market's up 20.7%. We're underperforming by 5.4%. So my concern is, in a nutshell, the low yields of government bonds all over the world, in particular Japan and Europe and also the US, although the US is kind of still, let's say, trying to hang on to some sort of normalcy, but we're clearly also sliding down that path. So I wouldn't be too crazy about the U.S. either. And the problem I have with that is the following. I think if we look at governments in general, just the way they work, they're run by humans, etc. We can't expect governments to be prudent with money unless they have a cost of money. And what's happening right now in the world is that the cost of money is going to zero for governments. And that to me has terrible repercussions on many, many sectors of the world. In fact, also on government itself. And I think what Lenin meant with, I think the exact quote is, it's paraphrased by John Maynard Keynes. I've never seen the actual quote by Lenin. Doesn't matter. The concept is the same. If you're a communist, if you want to equalize the world and take over power over everybody, then you want to control money, and you can control money either in the communist way by just controlling money explicitly, the way the Soviet Union did it and the way China is still trying to do it, or you can do it in the capitalist way, which is you try to control the banking system, you introduce a central bank, and so on and so forth. And this is what we've been doing for the last 100 and so years. The history of the formation of the Fed is a fascinating story because it shows how opposed people were to the Fed and why. And I would say, in a nutshell, the creation of the Fed was a power struggle between people that are obsessed with freedom, in particular, let's say senators in Oklahoma and places like that, and Wall Street. I think Wall Street wanted the Fed, first and foremost, to solidify its own power in the American economic system. And second, also, I think they really wanted an insurance from failing. Because actually, Wall Street already had a lot of power back then. We're talking now the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. Wall Street did have a lot of power. It's not like they needed to grab power from somewhere else. Relative to banks in the Midwest or even Europe, I think Wall Street had power. I mean, J.P. Morgan was a powerful person and all that. But I think, of course, if you have a system where you decide who wins and loses, and this is really what the Fed, I think the main purpose of the Fed is to incorporate a system in the financial world that has the power to decide winners and losers. If you have that kind of power, of course, you have even much more power, and you can also save yourself from bankruptcy. That was a concern that a lot of people had back then because we had all these bank failures all the time. And clearly today, I mean, we still have bank failures, but a lot less. And the beauty about the Fed is that we can decide who fails and who doesn't. It's a political process. It's not an automatic process anymore. And that creates all kinds of distortions, moral hazard, all that stuff that we've talked about at least since 2008, if not before. Now, my concern with all this is that, okay, fine, look, we have a problem with the Federal Reserve and we have a problem with printing money, but at least we had a bond market, and the bond vigilantes of the 1990s, when Clinton was in power, actually were probably the best thing that could happen to the US economy, because it showed that there is an accountability from the side of Washington when it comes to spending money. And if you study macroeconomics thoroughly, you will for sure always be exposed to the one and most important factor, which is that the constraint of spending money is taxes on deficits. So you can't just indefinitely spend money. And I think what actually happened in the last maybe 15 years since the financial crisis in 2008 is that that constraint has been removed from the equation. Politicians, I think, intrinsically feel they can spend as much money as they want. I just listened to an interview this morning by a very nice lady. The names doesn't matter here. She works for the German Bundesbank, and she's in charge of policy and things like that, and she runs a think tank and all that. That's not important. I think what's fascinated me or scared me about that interview actually was how nonchalant, I don't know if that's the right word, but how just normal it is for a person that works in a government institution in Germany to assume basically that government money is free. The government can borrow money for free. There is still a cost to distribution of money. You have to fight in parliament and all that, but the government has access to free money. And no matter how well-intentioned you are, no matter how good you are and smart and all that, you will fail in a system where money is free. If you don't believe me, just look at your own family and imagine your kids, your cousins, just your closer family, and just tell them, you know, here's my credit cards, do whatever you want, just be prudent. There is no family on earth that would not destroy itself after a while if that was the policy. It's just human nature. We have not evolved. I mean, I can even bring an evolutionary argument here, although that's a cheap one, but you can bring it. I mean, we have not evolved for that. We have, as a species, not evolved for abundance of money. And now here's the news. Money is not abundant. Money is not abundant because money just reflects the real economy. And if you think that money is free, think twice. Because what happens if you think like that and if you keep behaving like that, you will eventually create what we call inflation. In other words, money will become worthless and we will have to have a new system. And that is what Lenin was alluding to when he said, if you want to corrupt capitalism, just corrupt the currency, and then I am going to have the new system, which is called communism. Now, I believe that we have a third way, and the third way is based on blockchain technology, on Bitcoin and Ethereum and those sort of things, because we can actually create a decentralized money. And I think if we can create a decentralized money, we can actually take power away from powers. We can really redistribute power. And I think NLW's podcast about the breakdown is one of the most important podcasts out there. And as much as I sometimes dread his propaganda and all that, doesn't matter. But his central thesis is very, very fundamental. His podcast, which is really a sort of a propaganda voice for Bitcoin, is about power, and Bitcoin is taking power away from established powers. And that is the gist of what I want to talk about today, because I think that's the only way out of this vicious circle that we're in now, with negative yields in Europe, in Japan, and very low yields in the US. We are on the brink. We are actually already destroying money. Europe has destroyed its monetary system. The euro is, in a sense, worthless if you look at it from the perspective of financial markets and incentives and incentives for economic growth. The euro has value. Of course, people in Europe don't complain. They can go on vacations and all that, which is the main occupation Europeans do anyway. But the point here is you can't, yeah, you can, I mean, you can have a currency that has value because you have a certain economy and certain goods and all that, services that reflect that currency. And for a while, maybe for a long time, you can maintain some resemblance of value for that currency. But if you really look down in the nitty gritty of Europe, the European economies are in shambles. There's unemployment. There's constant talk of economic crisis. So the wealth in terms of as a measure of freedom certainly doesn't work in Europe. So in that sense, I would say the currency is a massive failure. The euro is a massive, massive failure. And it's a failure also if you look at the government bonds. If something yields negative, that can't be a good thing. And fundamentally also there is inflation in Europe like everywhere else, because if you're a middle class family, you want to educate your kids, you want to have access to a high-end healthcare, and you want safety, which are the biggest and most expensive items, education, safety, and health. Those things are becoming as expensive as they are in the US. You know, people are forced to private schools because the public schools are deteriorating. All those things are happening in Europe. So if you look at it from that perspective, inflation is also rampant. What I want to say is that we have an alternative. We have an alternative, and the alternative is blockchain technology, in particular things like Bitcoin. I think I am absolutely on board with Jack Dorsey here. We need an independent currency, at least for the base of the global economy. We have to figure out ways to trade and make the currency less expensive in terms of transaction costs and all that. I am absolutely for that. We also have an investment in Algorand for particularly that reason. We're very excited about Ethereum. In fact, we don't even have an investment in Bitcoin. We are invested in Ethereum, in Algorand, not even in Bitcoin. And that's okay. I don't want to discuss that right now. What I want to say is the following. We believe very strongly that the only way out of this constraintless, reckless, I would say innocuous behavior, this behavior towards, I would say, a very bad place. We are going to a very bad place in places like Europe and Japan and China and potentially also the US. Now the counter force of all this, of course, is what our fund is all about, which is disruptive technology, innovation, growth, real deflationary growth in the sense that we make things better and cheaper. We solve massive problems like cancer and decarbonization of energy. If we can solve that, we can definitely boost our welfare, our wealth to other extremes, much higher extremes, and kind of almost like a body that is sick but is still so healthy that the sickness that the body has, this government deterioration that we're seeing, and the deterioration of money and the deterioration of government institutions can be overcome by the strong innovation that we see in the economy. This is our hope, and we've spoken about this in the past. And maybe short term that can work, but long term, again, if we don't put constraints on our governments through a monetary system that puts a price on borrowing money, it will not go well. And therefore, we believe that if we had a world, so just hypothetically, in 5 to 10 years, the world has transitioned to a Bitcoin-based global economy, and the dollar and the euro are worthless, you will have a price on money, and people will have to act the same way people in Lebanon right now. They can pretend to have the Lebanese pound as much as they want. It's worthless, and unless you have dollars or euro, you can't do business in that country. And the same thing could happen to us. What I'm saying here is that we here in the so-called developed world are in the same position like people in Lebanon. And Lebanon's kind of close to my heart. My wife is from there. I have therefore connections there, and I see how people suffer, and I see how people are also caught on the wrong foot. And that's the scary thing. And I don't want to be in that position myself. That's why this episode, I think, is a very important episode. Of course, there's two questions here. One is, okay, what's the danger? And I'm formulating the danger here. It is reckless spending by governments and the deterioration of the monetary system to the point where money becomes worthless. and the solution would be Bitcoin. But then the question is also, what do you do as an investor? The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So what do we do as hedge fund managers? We at Orange Capital Partners are of the view that it is still much better to invest in productive assets, even though they're denominated in dollars and euros, such as our stocks, because they will outgrow even any kind of this deterioration of money, and they as a value system still work. Than putting our money just in, let's say, Bitcoin, Ethereum. We have a small portion of our money invested in Ethereum and Algorand, so we are not completely not invested, but we still think that it is much more prudent for us as wealth generators to invest in productive assets such as Tesla and our CRISPR index. So this is not a recommendation. Like anything in this podcast, please do your own work. Don't just blindly follow what we say. We just give people a sense for how we're thinking, and this is what this is all about. It's not a recommendation by any means to invest money. Please do your own work. But I know a lot of people are interested not just in hearing what are the dangers out there, but also what can we do. And our recommendation is, okay, find productive assets that you think can over time apply fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices and have large impact, and by doing that also generate wealth. This is the way we think about it. And again, do your own work, and please don't just blindly follow what we say. So to summarize, Lenin's quote that the best friend of communism is basically an incompetent central banker destroying the currency. Unfortunately, about 100 years after Lenin, we are actually exactly witnessing that. I want to refer people to an excellent book about the history of the formation of the Fed. I'm going to put it below the link. The name eludes me right now. It shows, it's a really very important, one of the most important books I've read, at least when it comes to macroeconomics, because it shows the power struggle that was going on while the Fed was being created. And there, it's really about people that are in for freedom versus people that are in for control. And this is exactly what happened, that by allowing the Fed to happen, we basically give up control to an elite class of people in Washington and Wall Street. And unfortunately, this has gone wrong. And it was exactly as predicted by the people who were against the Fed in the early 20th century, and also as predicted by Lenin. Because you cannot give people this kind of power over money. They will destroy the money and therefore the capitalist system. I think as a solution, we have blockchain technology, in particular Bitcoin. So we do expect a global economy to actually transition to some sort of Bitcoin type currency, and that the money will be in crypto maybe in 5 to 10 years, maybe even earlier, because the speed of deterioration of government institution, in particular government or fiat money, is very rapid. There needs to be a cost of money, a cost of borrowing funds to spend money for governments and for companies and for individuals. Otherwise, the capitalist system doesn't function. Thank you.